Thanks for pressing play on another edition of Another Dolphins Podcast. The first wave of free agency is starting to wind down, so I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to take a step back and evaluate the Miami Dolphins roster as a whole. I have Kat and Houtz joining me today. Kat, we haven't had you on since free agency, since the new year began, so I'm just going to kick it right off here. The Miami Dolphins, one of their first moves, actually their first move in free agency, they signed Zach Wilson to a one-year deal, $6 million, can reach up to $10 million guaranteed. And Kat, I got to ask you, man, when you look at a quarterback room that is Tua Tagovailoa and Zach Wilson, would you consider that a roster strength or weakness?
Well, it depends if you're talking about the starter or the backup. Listen, I don't hate everything the Dolphins did this offseason so far, but this was the first move they made. And at the time Zach Wilson was signed, it was like, 5:30 p.m. Central or so. I think they hadn't re-signed or signed anybody, and they were the only team. And I was walking my daughter down the street, and I got the alert on my phone, and I heard that Zach Wilson signed by, and as I was scrolling down, I said, no, and it was the Dolphins. I look, I understand the logic and thinking that the former number 2 overall pick has potential, but we haven't seen that potential not only not play out yet in his career, but let's be honest, I mean, everything has been terribly overblown. This was supposed to be like a Patrick Mahomes clone with his ability to make plays with his legs and make off-balanced, off-platform throws, and none of that's come true. I mean, he's been terrible. He's had more touchdowns than interceptions in his career. Maybe the light clicks on in year 3 or 4, but I don't see what the rush was to sign a backup, and I don't see the potential of this guy. And in all fairness, if you asked any Miami Dolphins fan 6 months ago what they thought of Zach Wilson, they would start laughing. And so, yeah, I'm not a fan of the move at all.
Yeah, I thought like Zach Wilson in theory as like a quarterback 3 maybe, but to be your backup, to be the guy that's gonna inevitably be forced into the lineup with Tua Tagovailoa goes down. I mean, it definitely makes me feel queasy. But Kat, were you asking? Did you remember when we recorded the pod? You did say you don't care who it is, right? We live or die by Tua Tagovailoa. You didn't care who the backup was. It was Zach Wilson, man. So maybe they can get some of that untapped potential that we keep hearing. But yeah, I saw. Did you guys see the video today? They posted, and he looks like just a young little baby that's going to have to come in for Tua Tagovailoa. And I don't know, man. I'm a little queasy about it, but I do understand some of that, hoping that you can get some of those, that Mormon Mahomes, that Mahomes clone to, maybe eventually, hopefully develop into anything, maybe a quarterback 2 or whatever.
Yeah, if you listen to the last show I was on, I don't agree with paying the backup $6 to $10 million a year. Mm-hmm. And even if I did, Zach Wilson, probably of the guys that were available in free agency, would have been about 15th on my list. So, I mean, I don't see what the rush is. I mean, if who would you take for one game this upcoming season, Joe Flacco or Zach Wilson? I would take Joe Flacco. I mean, that's what it comes down to for me. That's why it doesn't make much sense. And even if you get in a situation where Tua goes down, Zach Wilson gets in and plays out of his mind, he's probably going elsewhere the following year anyway. So what are we doing here?
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, I was just going to say, did you feel any more confident in him than Snoop Huntley like last year? Like, I feel like, I don't know. I can understand the untapped potential, but it just seems like they didn't move at all at quarterback 2 when you need someone to step up in so many different situations. I don't know if Zach Wilson
I might like Zach Wilson a tad more than Snoop Huntley, but it's really give or take, and that's the whole point of the conversation.
In this scenario, I do wonder if, when you are really focused that Tua Tagovailoa is our key to winning games, Nick Mullins, 2 years, $6 million is one that speaks to me instantly. But this is a front office that's truly desperate, and if Tua goes down, they've seen Skylar Thompson come in for a single play and fumble the football. They've seen how bad it can be. Quarterback's a little bit of a unique conversation. As we go throughout this, we're going to see that the Dolphins are signing some names, but it's also a numbers game, guys. They really entered the offseason with like the fewest amount of players under contract. They have little cap space, so they got to throw so many players at the wall. I think they're still bottom, a third in the league with about 50-something players signed. They got to reach 90. I think last year they they added 12 undrafted free agents plus 10 draft picks. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers here, but I think it's important to consider that the Dolphins are focused on building a 90-man roster. roster instead of a 53. That doesn't completely make sense for quarterback because of the emergency quarterback situation. You can have that guy on the practice squad who's still floating back and forth. But Kat, what I'm trying to get at here is a very long-winded way of asking you, is this setting up for the Dolphins to maybe get that third quarterback in the third or fourth round of the NFL draft next month?
Yeah, when I look at the players that are available, I see at least 10 quarterbacks that are going to be drafted in the first 4 rounds. Yeah, and usually when that's the case, you don't actually have 10 quarterbacks drafted in the first 4 rounds. So I start looking at like those 5th round picks and saying, can you get like maybe a Kyle McCord that falls down to the 4th or 5th round that can be that developmental quarterback? So yeah, there's definitely the possibility of that. And when you take a look at the past, what the Dolphins have done in free agency, Teddy Bridgewater, the back, Mike White, Teddy Bridgewater, Jacoby Brissett, the money they've given to these guys, and they haven't backed that up by drafting a quarterback in the mid to late rounds either. They can't make the same mistake here. So if they've got 7 draft picks in the first 5 rounds, I think it's a huge mistake if they don't draft at least one of these quarterbacks in the first 5 rounds.
Yeah, and as corny as it sounds, I mean, even Zach Wilson was decent, or we even saw some potential in it. You should still be throwing that dart, right? Teams need that emergency quarterback. The Dolphins need an emergency quarterback more than probably any other team. So absolutely throw a dart in one of those mid rounds. But again, then does your confidence feel any better if a Kyle McCord or Dylan Gabriel is that third guy? You got Zach Wilson behind too. I mean, you're still living and dying by Tua Tagovailoa. So I don't think they're done adding to that room, but I would be very intrigued to see who that is, other than being a rookie.
Another position where the Dolphins aren't done, running back. Devon Achane, obviously you have a clear 1A in the room. Jalen Wright, you're begging, you're praying, you're hoping that next year he really starts to step up after the Dolphins invested a 3rd-round pick on him. But the Dolphins also added Alexander Mattison to the backfield. And Kat, I don't think this is really a signing about what Mattison can do on the field, more than it is about the fact that Wright and Achane have combined to play about 20-something games in the NFL. I just kind of felt you needed some dude with a little bit of experience back there more than anything.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're getting these out of the way first because Zach Wilson, Alexander Mattison, and Liam Eichenberg are the 3 moves I like the least. So let's look. Mattison has always, for me, been a player that looks the part but could never really put it all together. When he was a backup for Dalvin Cook, back in the first couple of years of his career, I really thought he might turn into something if he could add a little bit more power and a little bit more vision to his game, but that never really happened. And then, you get back to, he never really improved as a receiver. He didn't become more powerful as a pass protector. He, again, looks the part but doesn't play up to that. So, no, I think he is a veteran minimum contract type of guy, so I'm take it or leave it with it. I hope if the Dolphins had any plans in mind to draft a 3rd running back, I hope it doesn't prohibit that. But I'm not a huge fan of this signing either.
Yeah, I don't know that I hate it. I mean, it's an RB3, and I think we kind of joked, like we have Salvin Ahmed, Myles Gaskin, the guys we were kind of typically accustomed even starting here. So to have him as your 3rd guy, I'm fine with that. But I do think, we've seen it before. They should absolutely draft someone, and then they should bring in an acorn, the day, after the draft's over, bring in another guy to compete. So intrigued to see what his role is, right? Because it has to be Devon Achane and Jalen Wright. That's to be their thought. But having Alexander Mattison, he does have experience. You can do a lot worse, but I also felt like there were some guys out there that you could have done a lot better if you wanted to bring in a veteran that could be productive.
From here, I'd love maybe one of the day 2 picks. Maybe you trade back into day 2 and then maybe a day 3 pick, 2 more running backs on the roster. And knowing the Dolphins' luck, it'd be the 6th or the 5th or the 7th rounder who steps in and earns snaps while the 3rd or 4th kind of spins their wheels a little bit here. One name I want to bring up really quick. Josh Moser had on his show. Oh man, Josh, you got to help me here. I can't think of the name of the agent. Jeff Wilson, Emmanuel, the guy, Drew Rosenhaus. I'm fairly certain he has half the clientele in the NFL. He was with John Moser, and he mentioned that Jeff Wilson is another name that's still lurking in the background. And when I saw people getting like annoyed or upset about Madison, like that's initially where I thought, like, guys, they have vets on this roster all throughout the last 2 seasons they barely used, like Jeff Wilson. Kat, was that Rosenhaus just trying to keep Wilson's name in the media, or do you think this running back room has room for another veteran?
Yeah, I mean, usually the Dolphins have kept 4 or 5 running backs. To me, I like Jeff Wilson more than Alexander Mattison, to be honest with you. And
me too.
we've talked in the show too about why Jeff Wilson is not more involved. I mean, we look at game 1 last year against the Jaguars when the Dolphins were putting the game away, and Jeff Wilson was a big part of that. You look at 2023, Jeff Wilson was a big part of the fourth quarter when the Dolphins beat the Cowboys, which was their only win against a playoff team in the last 3 years. And he does that, and then it's like it doesn't happen, and we don't see the guy again for 4 weeks. So, no, I would have liked Jeff Wilson to come back over Madison.
Yeah, I mean, again, they're not done in this room at all, right? I think it was McDaniel said 2 or 3 more guys they'd add to the unit. I don't understand it, though. Like you mentioned with Jeff Wilson, he has success in situations where you feel confident that he can go in there and be that closer in a sense. And Mike McDaniel just, the next week he has amnesia and forgets all about it. So would like to see them try to bring in someone that would even an upgrade over a Jeff Wilson. But if he's coming in to be, a vet to battle with Madison for a spot, I'm fine with that. If that's what Mike McDaniel wants to do, I just hope they utilize him, because even Alexander Madison, he's pretty successful in those short yard situations, but are they going to utilize him?
As we turn to wide receiver here, you woke up Monday morning, recording this on Monday, and bang, Cincinnati Bengals signed Jamar Chase long-term. They signed T. Higgins long-term. And man, I got to say even the Tyreek Hill contract, but Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, you just feel a little sigh of relief when you get those guys out of the way early, when you see these prices just go up and up and up. But when you look at this Miami Dolphins receiving core, we know for a fact it starts and probably ends with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But the addition of Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, despite being a wide receiver 3, despite being on a Titans team that doesn't know what the word offense means, man, I'm pretty excited for that.
Yeah, I did like this signing a lot more than other people. Not 2 years, $6.5 million, not a lot. The guy, somebody who had on a bad team 9 touchdowns last year, somebody who in the red zone is able to make things happen. I think he brings a different skill set. I think he's able to get vertical, and he's a good route runner as a vertical threat too. Mm-hmm. So I think he and Tua are going to get along really well. And for just a few $1 million, I think it's worth it. It also comes with an asterisk too. I want the Dolphins to be done with pass catchers now. It's been so annoying over the last couple of years, them just adding Odell Beckham and River Craycraft and bringing this guy back and bringing that guy back. I mean, I like Westbrook-Ikhine. I like the signing, and one kind of exciting thing too is you just look at last year. The Dolphins had 614 snaps at receiver taken up by Durham Smythe in the slot or split out wide, River Craycraft, Odell Beckham, Braxton Berrios, Grant DuBose, D. Eskridge, Robbie Chosen, and Eric Ezekama. So that's a lot of players to be rotating in and out. Get Westbrook-Ikhine in there, a fighter, a good route runner, gets along with Tua so that they can have some continuity still if one of these receivers goes down.
Yeah, I think it's an underrated signing, like you mentioned. I think he brings a different aspect. I wish we didn't need him, necessarily. Like, I wish Eric Ezekama would have stepped up and did something throughout the years. But they saw an opportunity to upgrade the position, like you mentioned. Not a lot of money at the, salary wise. So I love this signing. Intrigued to see what he does in the red zone. And you see him, the clips going around, what he can do in the run game as well. I mean, I think that was an emphasis this offseason, trying to improve in all assets of the game. So I like this signing. I can't believe people are upset about it, though, but I'm not surprised, really.
Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, and Malik Washington. There's 4 guys right there. Let's say the Dolphins are going to plan to keep 5 wide receivers. They obviously could draft someone. Kat, I think I agree with you that I'm pretty set. I think we have enough pass catchers here, but I want you guys to just pick one here. We got Eric Ezekama, D. Eskridge, Tariq Black, who I think spent most of the last season on the practice squad. And then you got Taj Washington, second year, former 7th-round pick. I think he was Caleb Williams' favorite target at USC.
Yeah, and what I like about it, it gives the Dolphins some roster flexibility because you could legitimately go into the season with just those 4 guys. They'll probably keep a 5th guy with those players that you mentioned battling it out. But, Jonnu Smith is basically a receiver. Devon Achane is basically a receiver. So you've got some options there too. So then you put like Eric Ezekama and Taj Washington and the rest of the crew in a situation there too where somebody really has to step up. And if not, you can take that 5th or 6th wide receiver spot and spend it on a different position on the team.
no one loves mid wide receivers more than me. So I'm hoping that Taj Washington steps up and, can take that spot away from Eric Ezukama, who another guy that I, have hype videos for. So I agree with both of you. Those 4 wide receivers are real strong. Would love to see this thing play out and have Taj Washington or Eric Ezukama run away with it. But as we've seen in the past, they're not done in this.
Christmas morning, you sprint downstairs, the lights are on, there's presents everywhere, but underneath the tree is James Daniels, Miami's looks like prize free agent addition. Kat, what were your thoughts when you start to see a few of the higher up guys go? All their names are escaping me. I've been listening to so many podcasts this week, but you see like a guy with the Titans, David Moore, I think makes $80 million over 4 years. What do you think James Daniels coming to Miami on a 3-year, $24 million deal?
Yeah, Dan Moore for the Titans.
Dan Moore.
Left tackle gets, $19 million a year, I think.
Crazy.
They've spent 2 first-rounders trying to get rid of the guy over the last couple of years. So, yeah, that was a shocker. But, yeah, James Daniels is somebody that was really high on my list and a great scheme fit, too. Now, he's coming off the torn Achilles, but he tore his Achilles also in Week 5 of last year. So he's supposed to be healthy this summer. Now, the Achilles injury for somebody whose game relies on mobility, that could be a little bit tricky, but James Daniels, his entire career, he's been so mobile as an interior lineman that even if his mobility goes from an A down to a B, I still think he's a really good player and a great fit at one of those guard spots. So he's someone who can play all 3 interior line positions, should settle in at left guard, and you hope that he stays healthy. And for 3 years, $24 million, without question, my favorite move for the Dolphins this offseason.
Yeah, and I think for those that were listening to the podcast, even if we were sitting there, we were talking about the Aaron Banks signing and Dan Moore and things like that. And I think you even said, would you be upset if your phone notified you that James Daniel was the signing? And here it was. So, I mean, the Achilles injury, you do wonder, how that'll affect his mobility, how quickly and how he'll, get acclimated into this offense. But this was the Wagyu steak of this free agency class. We knew they needed to attack the guard spot. They couldn't really fork up some of that pay that some of those other guys got, but bringing in a guy like James Daniels, you brought him in on that contract. You might have only been able to sign him for that because of the injury and things like that. But I love this signing and love that it shores up that left side of the offensive line.
I'm sorry, guys. Left guard or is he a right guard? For some reason, I was under the impression he's a right guard.
He's played both with the Steelers and the Bears.
Where would you prefer him?
I don't have a huge preference. Yeah, not sure right now. And I don't. I really think the other offensive guard for the Dolphins is not on the roster right now. So I'm gonna take a knee on that question until the draft or the second wave of free agency.
Couple other players the Dolphins signed. Let's start with Larry Borom, former Chicago Bears offensive lineman. I don't want to hype this up too much, but the Dolphins have had a bit of success moving players around, kind of identifying traits. Aaron Brewer and Connor Williams, 2 guys that never or had little center experience. They kind of just threw them there and went with it. Kat, is there any chance you could kind of squint, maybe tilt your head a little bit and see a guard in someone like Larry Borom?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, this is somebody who's played 1,900 snaps already in his 4-year career with the Bears at left tackle and right tackle mainly, but he also, I think, has 20 snaps or so at guard, so he has at least been looked there. And he does have really good size. He's, 6'5", 330 pounds. He's a big dude. Best fit is at right tackle, but you have to think that the Dolphins were thinking maybe we can get away with something here and move him inside to right guard, play James Daniels at left guard, and if we want to go cheap at those positions, we don't have to reach on a need in the draft. Now, it's still one of the top 3 needs for the Dolphins on the team at guard, and Eichenberg doesn't fix that either. But I think if you're trying to get a little bit creative, then this could make some sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, at this point, it's just in Butch Barry we trust, right? We saw what the Dolphins could do with, mediocre guards. I love the James Daniels signing. If they can get anything out of Larry Borom, right? If he can move inside and, like you mentioned, if he can stay on that right side and then you can put James Daniels over there with Patrick Paul. I mean, Jake, you asked where I think that he would be best. I really don't think there's a preference for James Daniels, but to have him next to Patrick Paul, as he still learns the game, that won't be the worst thing. But I don't know that you can truly trust Larry Borum, and maybe that's why they brought in Liam Eichenberg and some of these other signings. They're just going to, have James Daniels on the one side, either side, and then just let the best guy win that other guard spot.
Kat, I know you already foreshadowed it, and I know you're already trying to defer, but I'm a journalist by trade, and I need to ask you the direct, hard questions here. How do you feel about Liam Eichenberg being back on the Miami Dolphins?
Oh, it's I couldn't believe it's fantastic. I mean, I mean, listen, if Liam Eichenberg were on a different team, and the Dolphins signed him for 1 year up to $4 million, and he played every position on the offensive line in his short career, and was never a good player, but at least went from worst in the league to terrible last year, I guess, is the best compliment you can make. I would have said, okay, maybe he's improving a little bit, and he's cheap, and he's versatile, and maybe he can be like a Michael Dieter type of player for you. But it's really bad optics for the Dolphins. I mean, this guy has been a punching bag for everybody over the last couple of years. Anytime he's gotten extended playing time, it's never worked. Didn't work at left tackle, didn't work at right tackle, didn't work at the guard spots. He had a couple of decent games at center, and then he fell back to his old self. So, no, I mean, if he's somebody that can, I guess, allow you to have 8 offensive linemen instead of 9 and spend a roster spot somewhere else because he can play three interior positions, I guess that's his best value. But no, I can't believe they went back in this direction.
I mean, that's it, right? You just hope that he can be of that value. I mean, I always said, like, I wouldn't be upset if he was that 6th offensive lineman, if he was that Jesse Davis, but then he came back, and I kind of feel like I would have been okay, if he signed anywhere else. So it's horrifying because I can just picture it now. We're talking about Larry Borum, maybe, starting at guard. We talked about, whoever they could go after in the draft. Do you not foresee at some point Liam Eichenberg on that starting offensive line? And that just terrifies me. So I would have loved to see him eat it into the moon. He's back. Hopefully he can be that versatile, tackle, swing tackle, guard if necessary. But I'm just terrified he's going to be starting at some point. And we already saw what that is.
I was surprised that so many people went right to that thought. Like, I get it and it makes sense, but do you guys remember that Jack Driscoll was the first free agent the Miami Dolphins signed last year, or one of the first free agents the Dolphins signed last year? And we did multiple podcasts talk about how Jack Driscoll is going to be a key piece of that interior offensive line of the Dolphins. I'm not going to freak out about Eichenberg just yet. I think he's the ideal camp body, Cat, just for exactly what you said. You can line him up everywhere. I wonder if he really has that value as a 3-position guy, because I know the Dolphins love Andrew Meyer as a backup center. So you wonder if they're going to just kind of trust those type of guys. But more than Liam Eichenberg, just looking at this unit as a whole, what does an offensive lineman at pick 13 truly do to this group? Whether it's Membu, whether it's Kelvin Banks, does this take a unit that we thought was so dreadful and so ugly? Right now, it kind of, if you squint, you can say it's solid, maybe bottom third, but near the top of that third. Kat, what does adding a guard in the first round who has future left tackle or any sort of tackle potential, what does that make you feel about the line?
Yeah, I mean, it would improve the offensive line on paper, to me, a full letter grade. If you took, again, I haven't moved off Armand Membu being my number 1 player on my board. If you take out the obvious guys, Travis Hunter and Mason Graham and the quarterbacks, take the top 5 or 6 obvious guys off the board, Membu's my guy. Because if now from left to right you line up, let's say Armstead or Paul at left tackle, Daniels at left guard, Brewer at center, Membu at right guard, Austin Jackson at right tackle. Now you've got Eichenberg as your backup. You've got Meyer back there. You've got Larry Borum for depth. Yeah, you move everybody down a slot, and now that offensive line goes from a C or a C plus to maybe a B or a B plus, and that could make a huge difference here in the offseason.
Yeah, and I don't know how they're going to go about it with need, but I would feel so, I'm looking at it like you said, Jake. You can squint, you can see that solid, you can see the vision. But if you would draft a guy like we talked about, the Banks, the Will Campbells, the Membus, if you can get one of them in there, I mean, then that does look like a strength to me. And then, then I'm bought in. I hate to be that guy, right? I shouldn't be. A move like that would definitely make me feel a lot differently about the Dolphins' potential in 2025.
Switching over, flipping the coin, going to the defensive side of the football. Defensive tackle, Cat, I'm going to kind of put them together. Defensive tackle, if you want to say that 3-4 edge rusher here, that type of player. The Dolphins only have 2 of them under contract currently, Zach Sealer and Neil Farrell. Matt Dickerson, I think he's also hanging around too. And Kat saying, and Josh, is saying who, and that's exactly kind of the point here. But Kat, outside of Calais Campbell kind of just jumping out of thin air and saving this unit, what else can the Dolphins do?
Yeah, and I don't think you can sit around and wait for Calais Campbell. Look, Calais Campbell's 39 years old, and the Dolphins signed him last year. Was it June or July? And this is not somebody who's going to sign before the draft and go to mini camp and be around for the entire thing. I don't believe so. You can't just hang on to those dollars and just hope that he comes back. And as we sit here, even if you're getting two okay veterans to just play with Zach Sealer, which is the move that I think the Dolphins have to make, even that group of free agents is going. I mean, you start going day by day, and even like the Derek Nandis from the Chiefs, he goes to the Jets. Solomon Thomas goes to the Cowboys. You've got like 15 or 20 of those signings where it's like, okay, I could have seen that guy come in for a year and do a decent job and allow us to draft the best player available at 13 and at 48. But what I don't want to have happen is I don't want the Dolphins to be in this position where they were at in 2014 when they ignored the right tackle class in free agency. And then they got to the draft, and at pick number 19, instead of trading down or drafting Brandon Cooks with that pick, they were forced to take Juwan James. And that he wasn't the best player on the board. They reached for him at that time, and I don't want the same thing to happen for the Dolphins at defensive line. And fun fact here, well, not so fun fact for the defensive line right now is I see 3 guys in free agency right now that had played over 600 snaps last year for the year. That's Calais Campbell, Benito Jones, and John Jenkins in the entire NFL. So I don't quite know what you're going to do at this position. If you told me you're getting Calais Campbell and Benito Jones back and calling it a day, I'd probably take that right now.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with you, Kat. Like, I understand waiting for Calais Campbell because how much of an impact he had, I'm sure, in that locker room, what he did on the field. I mean, you can just plug and play. Like, you don't have to worry about that spot then. But I feel like they should have been, bringing in someone yesterday, right? You saw Deshaun Hand get signed elsewhere. That's a guy you really like, Kat. You mentioned Benito Jones, John Jenkins, some guys that could fill that depth spot. They have to do something. And I feel like the longer we get into this, yes, it's early. 1 week into free agency, so they still have time, but I feel like they're starting to let those free agents dwindle down, like you mentioned, and then you're just going to pigeonhole yourself with draft time, right? I love Kenneth Grant, but the best thing about Chris Greer, the best thing about the Dolphins is them heading into the draft without a true need. And right now there's some, you can look at this roster and see some needs, unless, of course, Calais Campbell signs.
I think Hans deal is 1 year, $4 million. And if I wanted to get really mad and really upset about the Dolphins have done so far, why didn't you give that contract from Liam Eichenberg to Deshaun Hand? I think that's probably the one thing where I'm a little up in arms. But we're talking in the margins here. I think there's some work to be done. I do wonder if the Dolphins have sat on their hands this long. They wonder if Calais is going to come back. And you do wonder if someone like him, someone like Armstead, 2 guys that probably don't want to deal with the mini camps in May and June, they're probably going to sit out and just be ready when the season comes because that's what professionals do. Kat, I'm not sure if we've had you on to talk about this, but Bradley Chubb, he restructured his contract. It's going to be deeply incentive based. So he is returning for the Dolphins next year. Obviously, you have Jalen Phillips coming back from injury, Chop Robinson, Quentin Bell re-signed, Cameron Good re-signed, and then you got Mo Kamara, and I got to say Grayson Murphy waiting in the wings. Could defensive end be Miami's superpower?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the linebacker unit in general, that's the best news of the offseason for me. I mean, getting Bradley Chubb back, $3.1 million, and the rest is going to be incentives for a guy with his talent level coming off that injury. I mean, great news, and gave the Dolphins a lot of flexibility. And I was pretty mad that they didn't re-sign Tyrell Dodson at the beginning of the offseason to get him back a few days into it at 2 years, $8.5 million. I think is a massive signing. Is really good value. So the linebacker spot, I'm safe to say we can go into the season with this.
Yeah, and I know he's more of a, I guess, defensive end, but the Dolphins, Josh Moser reported the Dolphins are also still talking with Emmanuel Agba, so they might not be done adding to that unit. But looking at it on paper, Bradley Chubb, Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips, that alone gets you excited. And then you have the depth pieces as well. So I love what they did in building the defensive line. But who's to say Mike McDaniel won't, push to have an edge early in the draft? Like, that's one of those positions I could see him drafting every year. You would not be surprised if they take an edge in the first round at any point.
They re-signed Tyrell Dodson, and this inside linebacker core is kind of looking like they did at the start of last season, where you had two definitive starters, or at least you thought that way, with David Long Jr. and Jordan Brooks, and then you had Anthony Walker waiting in the wings. The Dolphins also signed former Tampa Bay Buccaneers linebacker KJ Britt, and if I could put this as simply as possible, it looks like the Dolphins added a young Landon Roberts here, just a mean physical thumper. Maybe you don't want him out there playing more than 50% of snaps per game, but it seems like they really figured out the traits they need to have a complete linebacker room.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison to Landon Roberts. Just a mean two-down thumper. Doesn't cost a whole heck of a lot of money. Yeah, I really like the KJ Britt signing. I think he brings a little more two-down potential than Anthony Walker did. So yeah, I was a big fan of that too.
And you get younger too at that signing, so it was a win-win in that situation. I'm looking at the unit, and I like what Dotson did last year. I agree with Kat, great value. I mean, they led the team in interceptions last year, but do they feel content right now with that linebacker unit? I mean, I would love to see Channing Tindall do anything to prove that he deserves a roster spot, but I don't know that that's not a position they're not looking at. I wouldn't necessarily day one, but at some point in the draft to build up that linebacker room.
A position there's no doubt in my mind the Miami Dolphins are beginning to focus on: cornerback. You have your 1A. You have Jalen Ramsey, the third highest paid cornerback in the NFL after some recent deals. It's seeming like Kader Kohou's going to return after the Dolphins gave him some sort of tender. I'm still very raw when it comes to understanding that stuff, picking up on that stuff, but it's leaning towards Kohu will come back. You have Storm Duck, who started 3 games last year, a bunch of names: Ethan Bonner, Cam Smith, and the Dolphins actually signed former Miami Hurricanes cornerback Artie Burns. But Kat, I don't think you have somebody, if Storm Duck has to come in the middle of the year and start a game, that's one thing. But to enter the year with a second-year undrafted free agent or some sort of inexperienced cornerback, I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, they better have Kader Kohou back this year. And, because to me, not only is he one of my favorite players on the team and somebody that I think really has a lot of upside, and he's had some down moments, but I think he's had some really, really good moments too. But aside from that, I have no problem with letting Javon Holland walk. Obviously, I have no problem with letting Jordan Poyer go wherever he's going. But I pretty much disagree with everything the Dolphins have done here at defensive back. I thought they could have done so much more. Like Kendall Fuller, I understand he got hurt twice last year, but I thought he played really well for a veteran cornerback when he was on the field last year. And you cut him over, what, $3 million? I mean, isn't that... And then you turn around and, and at safety, they sign Afidi Melifonwu as well as Ashton Davis. Melifonwu, I think, has good upside potential as a zone safety. Did have the injury last year, but was starting to come on when he got hurt, but is still coming off a season-ending injury. And Ashton Davis for the Jets, he's got 8 interceptions in his career, but didn't play 250 snaps last year. So you're going with that at the safety position. Would it have made more sense to get somebody like a Jeremy Chin, for example, for $8 million a year for the combined cost of Melifonwu and Ashton Davis? And then we could be saying 4 of the guys in our secondary are Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller, Jeremy Chin, and Kader Kohou, instead of what we have now. It seems like the Dolphins have Jalen Ramsey and a lot of depth pieces right now. So I think cornerback is very much on the board. Will Johnson is still somebody from Michigan, very high on my board as well. If you can pair him opposite Jalen Ramsey in this zone defense, I think you've got quite an identity in the secondary. But then you're also talking about spending your first-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, still feel like Will Johnson's that pipe dream. I agree with you, though. I mean, the Dolphins got rid of Kendall Fuller for a marginal price, and now they're sitting here trying to find that guy to replace him with. I mean, the Artie Burns sign, that's whatever. He's gonna be battling the Isaiah Johnsons and Ethan Bonners of the world, but who's gonna be opposite of Jalen Ramsey? I mean, I love to say that Cater Coe can hold that spot down, but I still feel like he might be better in the inside. So I need to see what the Dolphins are gonna do there, and then at safety, I mean, I kind of like the upside of Melifonwu and Ashton Davis on the last pod, but the more I look at this unit, I mean, this secondary, the defense, the cornerback and the safety position, they need to still do a lot of work there, I think. And I don't know if they're going to be able to go into the draft with what they have right now, because I mean, then you're almost going to be reaching for need, like you said, and we can't do that. So I was looking at guard and defensive tackles, those spots that, I really felt like were huge needs, but as we got down to here, cornerback, safety, I'm definitely feeling a lot queasier than, I might've felt coming into this.
I love that cornerback at 13 slowly becoming more and more of a conversation. I think that just would be if we want to have a conversation about how the Miami Dolphins can improve the most with a single pick, I think it would be cornerback. Looking about how this secondary is being built, I was listening to Javon Holland's podcast, and he was talking about the Miami Dolphins defense, and he was talking about how that this looks like a franchise that wants to build from the front backwards. Obviously, you do what you can to bring back Bradley Chubb. You got Jalen Phillips. You got Chop Robinson. And if you're only spending combined $6 billion on Davis and Melifonwu, I do wonder if this is going to be it. And I don't mean it as in this is all they're going to do, but this is it in free agency. I wonder if that the Dolphins, when you look at the salary cap and how much money the Dolphins had available, you sit down with Anthony Weaver and say, hey, what's one position we really got to not only cut coupons, it's the bare minimum here. You do wonder if you can get by with that stout front seven you're hoping to have. Elijah Campbell does enough. Davis does enough. Just somebody where it's not I still pronounce his name wrong. Clayton Fedulum getting torched by Tyreek Hill in that game against the Chiefs. That one sticks in my head, but I don't think the Dolphins are going to run that type of defense under Anthony Weaver. Just seeing how this is built, you really think that you're going to have two safeties sitting back most of the time, just kind of playing in that shell. I think Javon Holland used umbrella, where Holland is at his best, where Fangio, surprisingly enough, was using him, and Flores before. You get them all over the field. You have them disrupting packages as a playmaker. I don't think the Dolphins want to run that type of defense anymore. And these, price tags kind of hint at that. Perfect scenario, dream scenario, Will Johnson at 13, and then you do whatever you can, trade back up late first, early second, and that's where you get your Starks or the safety from South Carolina. He's been popping up lately. I think that'd be Miami's master plan to really rebuild the secondary.
Yeah, I think you're right on the first thing you said with the safeties, where, this is not the same type of Josh Boyer defense from a few years ago, where there was, a lot of man coverage responsibilities on the safeties. And I think that's why you're seeing them letting Holland walk and spending just a few $1 million on Melifonwu and Ashton Davis for the potential. Because they think, okay, even if they're not great, we hope that they can play back, keep things in front of them, and do their job. That's got to be the strategy. And that's why I do think Emenware and Malachi Starks are probably not going to factor in for the Dolphins in the first round. I think they've got their safeties. They'll add another one probably somewhere throughout the draft. But it wouldn't surprise me if they went into the season with Melifonwu, Ashton Davis, Elijah Campbell, and Patrick McMorris as their four guys, and spent spent their draft picks elsewhere.
I almost said shame on me for not bringing up Patrick Morris, but you did there. I mean, the one thing I will say with all these signings, right, whether it's James Daniels, he's a little bit more established, but all these signings, you can see the untapped potential, or, what the Dolphins' vision is and maybe how they can fit in this team. So I always say, trust the process. Well, I don't always say, but, the trust the process. In Butch Berry, we trust. In, whatever it is, I will sit back and let these cards fall, and hopefully they can surprise us with some of these signings, the Melifonwus, the Ashton Davis, those guys that maybe on paper look like, they can play, but I don't know how much you can rely on those guys. So intrigued by a lot of these signings.
Now, also, too, I was going to say just a couple of guys that stick out on the defensive line that are still out there. Mike Pennell is a nose tackle that's been in the league for a while, played almost 400 snaps last year. Maybe he can be your nose tackle for a year. Benito Jones, Calais Campbell, John Jenkins still out there. Charles Omenihu would be fascinating. He's a big kind of more of a 4-3 edge guy, but can he play some 3-4 D end at 6'5", 280? Probably at his size he can. And Brent Urban is somebody, too, who's been in the league for a while that Anthony Weaver's familiar with. So you do have some names out there, but not as many names as a few days ago along the defensive line.
We made it 40 whole minutes. 40 whole minutes, boys, without talking special teams and specifically punter. The Miami Dolphins have made a change. It looks like they're releasing Jake Bailey, which will free up about $2 million in cap space. And they signed Ryan Stonehouse, who everybody on social media is so jazzed up. I think he had the highest, the largest average distance of punt last year. And guys, I just want to ask, why is this guy available and why is he going to be cheaper than Jake Bailey if he is such a better punter?
Next to Bradley Chubb coming back for his price and James Daniels, this was my third favorite free agency move by the Dolphins. I don't know if I like the Stonehouse signing more, or do I like the fact that in my opinion, he's going to blow Jake Bailey out of the water. I mean, yeah, Jake, you're right. He had the longest yards per punt 2 years in a row, 2022 and 2023. And in all 3 years, he's had over 50 yards a punt on average. Now, the criticism against the guy is that a lot of times because of his booming leg, he outkicks his coverage. Now, I'll tell you this, I would much rather have that problem than Jake Bailey getting a punt at the 40 and on a clear Miami day and shanking the ball 29 yards throughout the game, which happened so many times over the last couple of years. I was elated by this signing, both because I'm confused why Stonehouse is available, and I'm hopeful and can't wait for Jake Bailey to be off this team.
It does sound like he suffered a knee injury, so I think that has something to do with it. But a lot of Titans fans, were kind of confused why they didn't even place the tender on him. So the fact that he was available, one man's trash is another man's treasure. I think we can all say and agree we do not want to see Jake Bailey in a Dolphins uniform ever again. And it sounds like, based on the performance on the field, I mean, yes, the hang time thing seems to be an issue, but if you're booming that thing, 10 plus yards further than the last guy, and it isn't going out of bounds and isn't being shanked, I think that the Dolphins had an opportunity to find an upgrade, and they did that. And he also has experience working with Craig Aukerman, the Dolphins do special teams coordinator. So it seems like a lot of these signings have some ties to some of these new guys. So again, we'll see how it all works out, but I'm so glad Jake Bailey's not going to be that guy. Do you guys have any concern with whether or not this affects Jason? Like, we would know, right? Jason Sanders kicking, I can't even hypothesize that.
Dude, I was just about to ask. You got to go full Pepe Sylvia, but you do wonder, like a couple of years ago with Morstead, like he's still around and he's still, no pun intended, he's kicking. So you do wonder, like, is this going to be the huge issue here? Are the Dolphins going to have quote unquote field goal snapping problems again?
Man, I heard that last year. That was the reason Jake Bailey was brought back. And
good grief.
Listen, I'm not somebody who says that they can go out and play professional football. But let me tell you this. You give me a week and a half, and I feel like I can hold a football down.
$2 million.
Like, that should be the last reason you keep a punter on your team, to hold a football for the kicker. If you can't get that corrected, I mean, Danny Crossman should never be a special teams coach again. And I know he's not for the Dolphins anymore, thank God. But, like, you can't, as a special teams coach, you can't teach somebody to hold a football. Like, so, yes, again, over the moon that Stonehouse is the punter.
Boys, this was an absolute blast. And everyone out there listening, thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. I hope everyone's recovering after a very fun and safe St. Patrick's Day. We will be back. Josh, I'm not entirely sure. When we start to hear some more news about what the Miami Dolphins are going to do next, we will be back with Another Dolphins podcast. But until then, Kat, thank you so much for joining us. And most importantly, hope everyone out there has a wonderful day, and fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.